Back in 2004, EA Sports released NASCAR 2005. Yeah, I don't get it either. Subtitled Chase for the Cup. It was the first game to implement multiple series, as well as NASCAR's new points format, which at the time was under some scrutiny. Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, and Dale Jr. could have had an amazing championship fight that went all the way to Homestead if not for a points reset that allowed Kurt Busch to swoop in and win it all. It's been almost 20 years since then, and not much has changed. We're just past halfway through the season and the top 10 are separated by just 104 points, which in a series where you can gain a 60-point swing by something as random as a tire blowout is not a very big margin. It has the potential to be another classic championship battle, if not for the NASCAR playoffs. It's no secret that the majority of the NASCAR faithful don't really care for the playoffs, as NASCAR's the only major racing series that uses them. F1, IndyCar, MotoGP, and virtually all of the big dogs use a year-long point system that remains consistent from start to finish. There are no stages, resets, or eliminations, just racing, and I think most people prefer it that way. Indeed, the playoff system is far from perfect, but alas, my friends, we have seen worse. Say what you will about stage points or playoff points, but at least those reward drivers for something within their control. NASCAR's earliest points format, used all the way up until 1967, was based not only on finishing position, but also the amount of prize money the race offered. This meant that the higher the payout, the more points were awarded. And I don't just mean the occasional double points race like the Indy 500. We're talking as much as 50 times the amount of points earned just based on the track you won at. This is what originally made Darlington's Southern 500 such a hot ticket, as it paid out way more than the other races and would consistently see 60, 70, and in one case, 82 cars show up to a race. The second largest payout, the Michigan State Fairgrounds Motor City 250, couldn't even muster half the payout of the Southern 500. You'd think with such an advantage, most who won at Darlington won the championship too, but strangely enough, it only happened once with Herb Thomas and the Hudson Hornet in 1951. It wouldn't be until 1959 when any race would even touch Darlington, with the inaugural Daytona 500 upstaging them with a mind-boggling $50,000 purse. Then came the World 600 with $80,000, and then the 500 again with the first ever six-figure payout for a NASCAR race. By 1967, the average pot had reached about $25,000, a far cry from the couple thousand it was just a few years prior. But wait, we're supposed to be talking about points formats. Well, even as the payouts increased, the system stayed the same, and by now the points totals were getting way out of hand. In 1964, Ned Jarrett trumped Richard Petty in just about every single category. Wins, top fives, top tens, even pole awards. And yet he still lost the championship by over 5,000 points, partly because of performance problems, but mostly because of where Petty won. His wins were worth about $25,000 more than Jarrett's, with the bulk of Petty's earnings coming from the Daytona 500, where he won 2/3 of his total earnings that year in just one race. To put that into perspective, under this format, William Byron and Martin Truex, despite having multiple wins and far more consistency, would still be trailing Ricky Stenhouse in the points, all because of his win in the 500. With the ever-increasing variance in payouts, NASCAR needed a new, more standardized system, and in 1968, they thought they had the answer. From here on out, points totals wouldn't be based on prize money, but rather the length of the race. It was simple. The longer the race, the more points you could get, though it didn't take long for this format to meet the same fate. In theory, it was an upgrade, as it was easier to understand and was much more fair on a competitive level, but it still had its quirks. Sure, they had races that were 400, 500, 600 miles long, but they also had races that were less than 100, with the tiny Islip Speedway in particular hosting a mere 50-mile race. The fans visiting the track probably had a longer drive to and fro, and needless to say, not a lot of drivers showed up to these races. In one case, at a 1971 race in Houston, only 14 cars showed up, making the premier American Racing League look more like a fourth-tier feeder series. Once again, things had to change, and with backing from a new title sponsor, NASCAR was pressured into a new era, one of shorter schedules, higher revenue, and of course, a new points format. For all intents and purposes, this is the format they'd keep for the next 30 years, a system based solely on race performance, regardless of the length or the payout. This put an equal amount of importance on every lap of every race throughout the entire season. This was it. This was the format that would carry stock car racing into the spotlight as a premier motorsport not just in the US, but the world. Fast forward into the third millennium and things are much, much different. NASCAR is now the second most popular sport in the United States, only rivaled by the NFL. And in this particular season, a young hotshot named Ryan Newman has strung together an 8-win year, far surpassing everyone else's win totals. So where does he wind up? 6th place. It's true, he had far more wins than anyone else, but when he finished bad, he finished really bad. On the other hand, Matt Kenseth only had 4 finishes lower than 20th all year, but he could only manage a single win in just the 3rd week of the season. And yet, somehow, this was still enough for him to run away with the championship, at one point being as far as 436 points above 2nd place. He even finished the finale in last place, unthinkable in today's NASCAR. And while Matt was living it up, not everyone shared in the jubilation.
How about this one? I call it bold and bright. More like belongs in the trash!
NASCAR had already toyed with the idea of adding points bonuses for wins, but that wasn't enough. They needed to make sure that an ass-whooping like this could never happen again. So in 2004, they dropped one of the biggest bombshells in NASCAR history. This was a day that we're still talking about almost 20 years later, because no other change to the sport has ever had such an impact. This wasn't just a formality, simplification, or even just a complication. It was a total restructuring of the sport from the ground up, resetting the points with 10 races left and only allowing the first 10 drivers to fight for the title. Imagine if the Premier League started doing NFL knockout-style playoffs. That's what it was like for NASCAR, and for the most part, people weren't buying it. Never before had such a high-profile motorsport let such a gimmicky system decide their champion. And while it did produce some memorable moments in its first iteration, it would end up failing to keep the attention of the NASCAR faithful, being cited as one of the many, many reasons for NASCAR's downfall after 2005. They tried making it easier to follow by making one position equal 1 point, tried to add intrigue by giving out bonus points for leading laps and winning the race, and even expanded the chase from 10 to 12 and, in one case, 13 drivers. Nothing was working, so once again they returned to the drawing board, where they had to make a choice. Go back to brass tacks and return to what worked, or double down and go full gimmick. What do you think they did?
I'm in way over my head.
If the chase was a farce that squandered the legitimacy of 26 weeks of racing, then the playoffs are a total unnecessary mindfuck for the fans, teams, and drivers alike. As if it wasn't complicated enough to begin with, they later added stages and playoff points to be awarded mid-race, as well as arbitrarily throwing cautions that ruined the ebb and flow of pit strategy and long-run performance. Throughout much of the sport's history, and even most of the chase era, the driver with the best average finish had the best odds of walking away with the cup, which is fair. Higher finishes deserve better results. And still, after 9 seasons of playoffs, only twice has it actually happened. If you're looking for the most illegitimate way to crown a champion, this might be it. But whether you want to admit it or not, the playoffs have also done something that the chase and all systems before it have failed to do. It's consistently created drama and highlights that are still talked about today. Without the playoffs, we wouldn't have gotten the Hail Melon. Jimmy Johnson likely wouldn't have won 7 championships, and most of the fights we've seen in the past 10 years would have never happened. When you put so much importance on a specific set of races, those races are bound to provide. And with the amount of variety being put in the rest of the schedule, NASCAR is finally on the upswing. Is it perfect? Hell no. But just to remind you, we've seen point systems based purely on race distance and prize money. Again, we've seen worse. Still, it's hard not to think about the what-ifs of the past 20 years. I mean, what if the chase never existed? What if the playoffs never existed? Well, how about we take a look into an alternate universe, one where every race played out the exact same way, only NASCAR kept its point system from 1972. Some things are the same, some things are different. Guys like Tony Stewart, Jimmy Johnson, and Kyle Busch still pick up their fair share, but Carl Edwards would find himself as a 2-time champion. Meanwhile, Kevin Harvick would be a 4-time champion, and probably the biggest bombshell of all. Jimmy Johnson wouldn't win 7 championships, but Jeff Gordon would. That's pretty astounding, but let's dig a little deeper. What would the modern era look like if they used the chase from the beginning? Well, there'd certainly be a much more even spread of championships between the old guard of Petty, Yarborough, and Waltrip. And while Earnhardt would still manage 5 cups, Gordon would only collect 2. Meanwhile, Harry Gant would actually be a 2-time champion, with his incredible September campaign giving him the 91 title. And despite the unlikeliness of him winning on that chilly day in Atlanta, Kyle Petty would take the 1992 crown, becoming the 3rd-generation Petty to win the NASCAR Cup Series championship. Fast forward to 2001, and while Gordon did have a great season, the final 10 races would see a 44-year-old Sterling Marlin pick up his first and only championship almost 25 years after his first start. And even crazier things than that would come after the chase era. If NASCAR kept the same format past 2013, Joey Logano would have not 2, not 3, but 4 championships, including 3 straight, despite Matt Kenseth's best efforts. And that doesn't even include last year, which would have gone to Ross Chastain by just 2 points over Kyle Larson, which would have been decided by this. That's pretty crazy. But let's get even crazier. What if NASCAR somehow thought the playoffs would be a good idea all the way back in 1972? Well, thanks to Reddit user PhoenixV07, we have our answer to that too. And if any of these are wrong, you can just blame him. Some noteworthy changes include Dick Brooks, Neil Bonnet, and Harry Gant, who in this hypothetical timeline has 3 championships. Matt Kenseth would have never won his 1-win title, Tony Stewart and Jeff Gordon would be capped to just 2 apiece, and Jimmy Johnson just 3, while other drivers like Greg Biffle, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, and even Dale Earnhardt Jr. would each pick up a title of their own. But the most mind-boggling hypothetical has to be 2006, where with a 3rd place finish in the final race, Denny Hamlin would be the first rookie to win a Cup Series championship. Made all the more painful by the fact that to this day, he's still searching for his first actual chip. Ouch. Now I can hear what you might be saying. Look what could have happened if not for these damn playoffs. But at the end of the day, these are just hypotheticals. There's no telling how Petty or Yarborough would have actually raced in the playoffs, or how Logano or Larson would fare with season-long points. No, the only true constant is this, the real world. We can keep on asking what if, but that's a question you could ask about anything, anywhere. And besides, it's just easier to sit back and enjoy the race. Because no matter what goofy gimmicks they try to employ, that's why we love NASCAR. Not for what happens off the track, but for what happens on it. Thanks for watching. I'd like to give a shout out to PhoenixV07 on Reddit and ESPN writer Matt Willis, whose posts online probably spared me from weeks of crunching numbers. I'd also like to thank RacingReference.info for supplying the data not only for this video or this series, but pretty much every video essay I've ever made, so once again, thank you. And thank you for watching and helping me reach 3 million views, 20,000 subscribers, and 11 years of making YouTube videos. I never really thought I'd make it this far, and while it has been a fun journey, it's far from over, so thank you for being a part of it. I'll see you in the next one.